1858, the Texas frontier, 40 miles northwest of Fort Worth. A small settlement in Wise County needs a name. Someone suggests Taylorsville after President Zachary Taylor, but state legislator Absalom Bishop doesn't like Taylor's politics, so he proposes a different name. Decatur, he says, after Commodore Stephen Decatur. And to make a long story very short, that's how a small Texas town got its name, Decatur, Texas. And here's the thing, 46 communities across America chose this exact same name. 7 entire counties, hundreds of streets, schools, Navy ships. So who was Stephen Decatur? And why did this name spread across America like wildfire? This is the story of America's first foreign fought war and our first conflict with the Islamic world, and the naval hero who ended 300 years of piracy by working with the American leadership to refuse to pay one more dollar. All right, so we're going to start a little different today. Start by saying, let's like, subscribe, comment. It really helps with growth of the channel. And I very much appreciate you being here and spending your time with me digging into Texas history. Today, though, I'm going to tell you a story most Americans have forgotten. When our country was young and weak, and when the Ottoman Empire deployed its Islamic pirates to control the Mediterranean Sea, when we paid massive tributes just so they wouldn't enslave our people. And to be clear, this isn't some Islamic protest video, it's just history, people. So don't come at me with political takes or this or that. I really don't care. If you don't like it, look it up and read it for yourself. Correct me if I've made mistakes, or take it as it is, which is a reminder. There's a lot happening in Texas these days, and every now and then we need a reminder. 1783, we've won independence from Britain. We're technically at this point a free nation. But for over a century, the British Royal Navy protected American merchant ships in the Mediterranean. Now that protection is gone. This is a problem, and an essential existential problem at that. During this time, the Mediterranean is controlled by 4 Islamic states: Morocco, Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli. They're part of the Ottoman Empire, and that Ottoman Empire operated under Islamic law. Here's how they make money: state-sponsored piracy. For 300 years, Barbary corsairs have been capturing Christian ships, enslaving crews, and demanding ransoms. Every European power paid annual tribute, which is protection money, for lack of a better term, so their ships can sail safely. It's expensive, it's humiliating, but it's been the system for centuries. July 1785, just 2 years after independence, Algerian pirates captured 2 American ships. 42 Americans were taken hostage, enslaved in North Africa. In 1786, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams meet Tripoli's ambassador in London. They ask, "Why attack nations who've done you no harm?" The ambassadors answer, "It's recorded in the official report." And I quote, "It was written in the Quran that all nations which had not acknowledged the Prophet were sinners, whom it was the right and duty of the faithful to plunder and enslave." End quote. So this wasn't just piracy. This was turning into religious warfare under Islamic law as interpreted by the Barbary states. Non-Muslim ships were legitimate targets. Remember, the beginning of our nation was built under Quakers and Protestants. Jefferson believed paying tribute was wrong, but America had no navy, no money. We were forced to pay. 1795, we signed a treaty with Algiers. $642,000 up front, about $12 million in today's dollars, $21,000 annually. By 1797, we'd paid $1.25 million to the Barbary states. That's 1/5 of our entire federal budget at the time. Between 1784 and 1815, nearly 700 Americans would be captured and enslaved. The system, it was simple. Capture Americans, demand ransom, use the money to capture more, a protection racket, and we were trapped. Year 1800, Thomas Jefferson runs for president, promising to end tribute. December 1800, the Pasha of Tripoli demands $225,000 immediately, plus $25,000 annually. or this time it's going to be war. March 1801, Jefferson becomes president, and the first thing he does is he refuses to pay. May 14th, 1801, Tripoli declares war on the United States. June 1801, 4 American warships sail for North Africa, America's first foreign war. The first time we've sent military forces across an ocean. Our first conflict was with the Islamic world. And it's going to make a 25-year-old lieutenant named Stephen Decatur the most famous man in America. Stephen Decatur was born January 5th, 1779, on Maryland's eastern shore. His father was a Revolutionary War naval officer. Young Stephen joined the Navy at 19 as a midship. By 1801, when the Barbary War begins, he's a lieutenant, eager to prove himself. On October 31st, 1803, disaster strikes. The USS Philadelphia, one of the most powerful ships, it runs aground near Tripoli Harbor, and Captain William Bainbridge and 307 men are captured, and they're thrown into dungeons. But worse, the people of Tripoli plan to repair the Philadelphia and add it to their fleet. One of America's best warships was directly in the enemy's hands. So Commodore Edward Preble makes a decision. We can't get that ship back. We have to destroy it. He needs someone crazy enough to actually try. And February 16th, 1804, Lieutenant Stephen Decatur volunteers. He takes 74 men, sailors and Marines, on a captured ketch renamed Intrepid. And here was the plan. They're going to sail into the Tripoli harbor at night, disguised as merchants, board the Philadelphia, burn it, and escape. 7 p.m., Intrepid sails quietly into the harbor under darkness. Decatur's men, dressed as Maltese sailors, fly British colors, speak Italian and Arabic. The Philadelphia sits surrounded by enemy gunboats. Shore batteries overlook the harbor. One wrong move, and they're dead. They pull alongside. A Sicilian pilot calls out in Arabic. They're merchants who lost their anchor in a storm. Can they tie up for the night? The people of Tripoli agree. Decatur gives the signal. And this is when 74 Americans pour onto the Philadelphia's deck. Hand-to-hand combat, swords, pistols. The fighting lasts 10 minutes. Every man from Tripoli killed or captured. Not a single American killed. Only one wounded. They set fires throughout the ship, and they scramble back to the Intrepid. Shore batteries open fire. Cannonballs splash all around them, but they're small and fast. Behind them, the Philadelphia explodes into a massive fireball. 74 men in, 74 men out. 1 wounded, 0 killed. British Admiral Horatio Nelson, the greatest naval commander of the age, calls it the most bold and daring act of the age. This leads to Decatur being promoted to captain at the age of 25, the youngest in U.S. naval history. He becomes a household name overnight. But even bigger, the message to the world was that America will not be pushed around. The war continues through 1805. In April, American forces march across the Libyan desert and captured Derna, the first American flag raised on foreign soil. This is where the phrase, "to the shores of Tripoli," comes from. June 1805, Tripoli agrees to peace, $60,000 of ransom for prisoners, but no tribute, no annual payments. It's a partial victory, but hey, it's a start. If you fast forward 10 years, during the War of 1812, Decatur captures the British warship HMS Macedonian. He's now Commodore and one of the most celebrated officers in the Navy. But while we fought Britain, Algiers saw the opportunity. They resumed capturing American ships. February 1815, the War of 1812 ends. March 1815, Congress declares war on the Algiers. May 1815, Commodore Decatur sails with 10 ships as a squadron. June 17th, 1815, his forces defeat the Algerian flagship, kill their corsair admiral, capture their best warships. June 28th, 1815, Decatur arrives at the Algiers with a message. Here are my terms, non-negotiable. Release all American prisoners, pay $10,000 compensation, end all tribute forever, full shipping rights for American vessels. You have 3 hours to decide. The Dey of Algiers looks at the American fleet and signs. Decatur secures identical treaties from Tunis and Tripoli. November 1815, he returns home as, I quote, the conqueror of the Barbary pirates. 300 years of systemic piracy in the Mediterranean, 300 years of European nations paying tribute, ended by American naval power. The Barbary states never captured another American vessel. The message this sends was clear. The United States will not pay tribute, we will not submit, and we have the naval power to back it up. 1816 to 1820, Decatur is at the height of fame. Appointed to the board of Navy commissioners, he builds a mansion across from the White House. He and his wife Susan become basically the center of Washington society. But even heroes make enemies. In 1807, 13 years earlier, Commodore James Barron had been court-martialed for unpreparedness after his ship surrendered to the British. Decatur, well, I mean, he actually served as one of the judges. Barron was ultimately suspended for 5 years. And during the War of 1812, Barron stayed in Sweden, claiming he couldn't afford passage home. This put Decatur in the position where he questioned Barron's courage publicly. In 1818, Barron applies for reinstatement. Decatur opposes it. Barron takes it personally. Decatur writes back, I quote, "I should be much better pleased to have nothing to do with you." January 16th, 1820, Barron formally challenges Decatur to a duel. Decatur, he accepts, and on March 21st, 1820, the Decaturs host a wedding party for President Monroe's daughter. All of the elite of Washington attends. Nobody knows that in hours, Stephen Decatur is going to be dead. March 22nd, before dawn, Decatur rides to Bladensburg, Maryland, the dueling grounds. The terms, well, they're set. 8 paces apart, closer than usual, pistols raised before the command. Just before firing, Barron speaks words of conciliation. Both men acknowledge that there is no personal hatred. This is when their seconds, should stop the duel. If both men have forgiven each other, there's no actual need to continue. But neither second says a word. Present, 1, 2, 3. Both fire, both were hit. Barron, he was shot through the hip. That was survivable. Decatur, he was shot through the abdomen. Artery was ultimately severed. He's carried home, and that evening around 10:30 p.m., Stephen Decatur dies. He was only 41 years old. His widow, Susan, will spend 40 years insisting her husband was murdered. She calls the seconds the assassins. And some historians agree. Others will say it was simply, honoring culture of the time. I mean, we'll never know. But the man who ended 300 years of Barbary piracy died in a Maryland field over basically a personal grudge. March 24th, 1820, the funeral. President Monroe, Supreme Court justices, most of Congress attends. Over 10,000 citizens line the streets. A grieving sailor proclaimed he was the friend of the flag, the sailor's friend. The Navy has lost its main mast. And then a question: how do we remember this type of man? Over the next decade, the answer becomes very, very clear. And this is when 46 communities across America starts to choose the name themselves, Decatur. 7 counties, hundreds of streets and schools. And in 1858, on the Texas frontier, Decatur, Texas. To understand why Decatur became such a powerful name, we have to remember what America was like in the early 1800s. We were 40 years old. Most European powers didn't actually take us seriously. And for 2 decades, we paid massive bribes to Islamic pirates. So think about that humiliation, like trying to do something new, but just being under the thumb of everyone else. European nations had paid these tributes for centuries, so they'd accepted it as the cost of just doing business. But luckily, we had Thomas Jefferson who said no more. And Stephen Decatur gave America the military victory to actually back that up. When Decatur burned the Philadelphia, he proved that American sailors could not just take on anybody, but could match anyone, the biggest forces in the world at the time. When he forced Algiers to end tribute in 1815, he proved America had real power. This was about American identity. The principle, it's very simple. Free nations do not pay tribute of any form. We would rather fight than submit. We would rather build a navy than pay bribes. We would rather risk our sailors than see them enslaved. That principle, sets the template for how America would engage the world for, 2 centuries after that. We would negotiate, we would trade, we would seek peace, but we would not be extorted. We would not submit to threats, and we would fight when necessary. And that's what Decatur represents. Not just a hero, not just victories. The moment America proved we belonged on the world stage. The Barbary Wars were America's first military conflict with the Islamic powers. The Ottoman Empire had controlled the Mediterranean for centuries. The Barbary states operated under Islamic law. Look up and read how these times actually were for everybody else. The Tripoli ambassador told Jefferson that capturing non-Muslim ships was justified by the Quran. America was the first to decisively break that system. We didn't just win battles, then go back to paying. We forced a complete end to tribute, just like many other historically wrong things. This was significant in the relationship between the Western and Islamic worlds. Now, to be clear, this wasn't a war against Islam as a religion. Jefferson has been reported to own a Quran, believed in tolerance. Many Americans distinguished between Islam as a faith and the Barbary states' piracy. And I agree with that. But it was a conflict with states that justified actions through Islamic law, a conflict over principle. Would a non-Muslim nation continue paying tributes to Islamic power? Gratefully, as America, we said no, and we won. This set a pattern that repeats through history. Willingness to project military power overseas, to defend interest and principles when faced with demands we viewed as unjust. And that's again part of what Decatur, the name, actually represents, America's first no to a system that had existed for centuries. Later, similar sentiments would happen against communism, and you might be able to argue that this moral compass changed at some point when our politicians started being enriched and we fight for oil instead of principles. That would be a fair criticism. One that I take away from this is that tributes seem to take on new names in this day and age, some to Islamic communities and, well, some to others. Who, what, when, where, and why becomes irrelevant when the truth is that we are treated as a weak, naive country, again, where ideology that is taking advantage of our country is protected, and where our culture has become so weak that general population individuals cannot hold two ideas that are true at the same time. America is good, and America has made mistakes for sure, but if we want history to stop repeating itself, we actually have to know the history to avoid it. Approach things differently, be respectively cautious about international relationships, and avoid the exact things that led us into pointless wars and endless aggression. If you really care about the welfare and well-being of people, this is the intellectually honest way to approach the issues everyone seems to be having, opinions about on the internet, but I digress. 1858, Wise County, Texas. The frontier Comanche raids, Civil War is still 3 years away. State legislator Absalom Bishop needs to name the county seat. Why Decatur? He'd been dead 38 years. Why a naval hero for a landlocked town? Well, that's because by 1858, Decatur meant something specific. Decatur meant courage, refusing to back down, proving America could compete with any power. And, well, Texas being Texas, Texas understood that identity. Texas fought for independence, stood up to Mexico, claimed the right to self-govern. The spirit of Decatur refusing to submit, willingness to fight, matched that Texas spirit. So Decatur, Texas it was. And here's what I think. All around us are names with incredible meaning. Street names, town names, county names. And most of the time we don't think about them. Just words on signs that we pass by. But most of them, they represent something of struggle, something victorious, and something worth remembering. Nowadays, Decatur, Texas is growing. Population 6,400 and climbing, 40 miles from Fort Worth. As Fort Worth grows, Decatur grows. New neighborhoods, new businesses, young families. It's all, really changing daily. All of Texas is growing. But underneath the modern town, underneath the construction and growth, there's names that are reaching back, 200 years that just are all around us. And this is true everywhere. Washington, Austin, Houston, Lincoln, Jackson, Jefferson. Every name has a story. And, every story has layers. Most of the time we don't know them, but they're there. I'm the first to admit that history is complicated. Decatur was a hero who changed American history, but he also made enemies, held grudges, and he died unnecessarily in a duel. Both things are true. That's real history. Complicated people making consequential choices in sometimes very difficult circumstances. And his death doesn't diminish what he accomplished. The Barbary Wars still happened. America still refused tribute. Decatur still ended 300 years of piracy. But just like all stories, the complexity makes it richer, more real, more human. And we have history worth remembering. Not perfect history, not simple history, but real, complicated, consequential history that shaped who we are. If you don't believe me, I mean, you can look this all up yourself. The Barbary Wars are actually very well documented. It's in the libraries of Congress and everything else. Tribute payments are in congressional records, letters in the Library of Congress, ship logs are in the National Archive. I mean, it's all there. I looked it up. I mean, it's all real, all public record, and all very fascinating. So until then, the next time you're on Highway 287 headed northwest from Fort Worth, you'll pass through Decatur and you'll see the sign off the highway that says Decatur. And maybe you'll think about what that name actually means. All that history embedded in one word on a highway sign. And look, I'm going to wrap this up, but the town changes, populations grow, new buildings rise, old ones fall, things change. But the name, it remains, and the name still means something because, you know, as complicated as it may be, we have history worth remembering. Real history, complicated history, and consequential history. The kind that shaped not only who we are as Americans, but who we are as Texans. The kind embedded in everything all around us, whether we actually realize it or not. So, next time you pass through Decatur, Texas, or any of the 46 Decaturs across America, hopefully this gives you something to think about. And thanks for tuning in. We have new episodes coming out every Thursday, Art History Mysteries every Tuesday. And thanks for spending time with me. Appreciate it. See you on the next one.